talk about what they think they want to get out of the class.
Anything that's going to make me better.
Anything that's going to make you better?
Anything that will make me better. And more comfortable. Be able to maybe do a better job.
That's good. That's good. Well, and that's really kind of the purpose for this first class. Because, you know, as I've and don't get me wrong, I'm not 100 years old, and I haven't taught thousands of studies, and I'm not the guru, and I certainly don't know all the answers. I don't even know all the questions. But I've met a lot of people who've been very sincere about what they want to do, and they get out and they try really hard, and they talk to people and they talk to people, and they don't get what they think are results, in quotes. They don't see the results they want to see, if you follow what I mean. So this first class, I want to kind of set your expectations. I want to set not only what I think is a good, healthy attitude in personal evangelism, but I want to talk mostly what God expects of us. I mean, that's really the bottom line, isn't it? What does God expect of us? So, you know, we're not going to be talking about something that's new in Bible study methods. You know, you can go out and about every year or two, you'll see some book published. You know, a couple that come to mind are the Fishers of Men, for instance. That's one that's kind of popular a few years ago. And that's, my goodness, if you buy that, it's a binder about 200 or 300 pages thick. And it's a 12-study course. And you have to go through, and it's an extensive course. But they term it personal evangelism. And they expect the students to go through all 12 lessons. Okay? That's one thing that came to mind recently, you know, within the last 5 or 6 years, 10 years. But this, what we're talking about, this is more than 40 years old. It's proven. And we've used it in literally thousands of studies over since 1976. And you know, Dale has been involved with it. Desiree has been involved with it. If I can get this clicker to work. Yes?
Well, I think we need to keep in mind as we go through this that, I mean, this is designed for campaigns. That's designed.
Absolutely right. It's designed for campaigns.
In any situation. And you don't have to be able to walk up and knock the door. I mean, you know, anywhere you're at, you can use the principles that are in this. You know.
Absolutely right. The principles, in fact, in what I hope to convey to you this morning is that this is not just something you use on a campaign. This is something you can put in your toolbox and use it forever. It's like a mathematician learning the basic principles of calculus or the basic principles of arithmetic. That's a tool that he can use from then on, or a physicist or somebody like that, or a mechanic with his tool set. This is a basic tool that you can just pull it out at will. It's not something you have to memorize. It's not something you have to spend long hours of preparation. So that's a very good point. Now, this is a point that comes up a lot with some people, maybe a lot of people. They think they have to go to preaching school, or they think they have to go to, you know, some other type of course and spend long hours of study and memorize all kinds of verses, you know, before they're even eligible to try to teach somebody else the Bible. Now, what do y'all think about that? How much Bible do we really need to know in order to share the gospel?
At least as much as you knew when you became a Christian.
You need to know at least as much as you knew when you became a Christian. That's absolutely right. Well, obviously you have to know what it takes to be a Christian, right? You can't just take some person off the street who's never even seen the Bible and expect them to be able to share the study with somebody, obviously. But there is a balance there. Would you not agree with that? Okay? And the thing about this study, and I want to assure you this, it's not so much about Bible knowledge as it is about how to share that knowledge. You know, that's what we're going to talk about a lot in this course. Because the actual study is only 56 verses. And that's in 2 sessions. It's actually split into 2 sessions. The first part's about, I don't know, 25 or 30 verses, and then the rest in the second half. So it's not a long study. It's not arduous. There's no long hours of memorizing. And let me tell you this, if you do this, you will be one of the most effective personal workers in the Brotherhood. I want you to think about that statement. If you do this the way we say, you will be one of the most effective personal workers in the Brotherhood. Now, how can I say that? Well, we're going to talk about how I can say that in a little bit, but it's not because of me, it's not because of any man, it's not because I'm smart or because it's not anything to do with me. I want to point that out right now, or anyone else, not any other person for that matter. You may have some doubts about that, but as we go along, I think you'll understand what I mean when I make that statement. Okay? Well, that's kind of some expectations. That's a little bit about the study. Well, let's look at some history. This is something that interests me. How did all of this come about? Have you guys ever heard of a guy named Ivan Stewart? I see some people shaking their heads. He wrote a book called Go Ye Means Go Me. And probably the second best book on personal evangelism in existence. Now, Ivan Stewart, he joined the Navy in 1940 and was actually stationed in Pearl Harbor when the Japanese bombed it. And he talks about that in the introduction of his book. In fact, well, I cut off the screen there somehow. But he had several brushes with death that day, and that's what got him started thinking about God and religious things. And so he kind of went on. He tried to do some Bible study with people, and he was involved with some groups, but he really didn't know what he was doing. And so he went on for several years in the Navy. And it wasn't after he married his wife, Polly, who had recently become a Christian, that through her influence he became a Christian. Well, he was a very, what's the word I'm looking for? He's very sincere in his Christianity. He wanted to try to do the best he could. So he actually went to college to become a preacher. But while he was in college, he got to looking around and he said, preaching alone was not getting the job done. And that's a quote from his book. That's what he decided. Preaching alone is not getting the job done. So he became involved in personal work. And over the years, I'm condensing this quite a bit, but over a period of years, he became organized and started conducting what he called campaigns for Christ. And he had a Bible study method that he called the open Bible study. And over the years, he went to quite a few places in the U.S. and overseas. He would conduct several campaigns in a year, 2 or 3 a year. And we're talking about the 40s, 50s, and 60s time frame. Now, the connection between Ivan and the Northwest congregation was through a man called Roy Moore. In fact, Roy went on a couple of the campaigns with Ivan. And because of that influence, Roy came back and said, you know what, I think we can do this. We can maybe improve on this. So he developed the chain of scriptures that we know as a safety chain. And he improved on Ivan's method in a couple of ways. First of all, he reduced the number of sessions to only 2 from 5 or more sessions in Ivan's study. That, again, I want to emphasize that a lot of the Bible study methods you come across, they go in depth. They want to go on and on and on. They want to study this, they want to study that. You have quite a few charts. Another that comes to mind is the Jewel Miller film strips, which a lot of people have used over the years, and there's nothing wrong with it, but again, it goes on. It takes quite a few sessions to get through that. He organized the study so the plan of salvation was covered after only an hour or so. In other words, after the first session, you give the invitation right then, after an hour, because you've already covered everything the student needs to know. So you give the invitation. You say, okay, basically, here's what we've studied. Now, do you see a difference in what you did? Because most students will say, yes, I've been saved somehow. Do you see a difference in what we just studied and what you did to become saved? That's kind of along those lines is what we do. And we do it after the very first time we sit down with them. He removed the paperwork because in most studies, there's some paperwork involved. There's some kind of form, there's some kind of study sheet, there's some kind of chart. He removed all of that. The only material we use are 2 Bibles. That's it. We don't have anything else but 2 Bibles. One for the teacher and one for the student. And the other thing is, if the student comes, well, that's out of order. If the student comes for both parts of the study, sometimes we can't do that, but salvation is offered at least twice. So they get 2 chances. They don't just get 1, they get at least 2 chances to obey. Okay? So Roy worked with the elders of the Northwest congregation until they were organized enough to conduct their own campaign. Their first campaign was in 1976, and they have gone every year since then. In fact, this year was their 40th year. And we went to somewhere in Oklahoma. What was the name of that little town? I just went blank. Maybe it'll come to me in a minute. But we went and this year. Every year they send out campaigners to work with the congregation and knock doors and set up Bible studies. Do what? Shawnee, that's it. Thank you. I knew it was an S, but I just couldn't remember it. Now, as they go out, they'll go to a city that's much larger. Normally, they'll go to a city that's much larger than they can actually cover in 1 week because they go out for a whole week. And typically, we will knock between 13,000 and 15,000 doors in a week. Every year. Now, I was just looking, just out of curiosity, I kind of added up over 40 years, and I estimate we've probably contacted over 500,000 more, or more people in 40 years. Personally. That means face to face. Not, you can look at efforts such as the Herald of Truth, for instance, in Abilene, and other mass media kind of events that broadcast over TV and over the radio, and they may actually reach more people, but they don't do it personally. We did it personally. When I say we, I've only been involved, I haven't been doing it for 40 years, but the last 5 or 6 years, however long it's been, I've been involved with it. And by my estimation, they've probably done more to evangelize than any congregation since the first century in the beginning of the church. Now you want to think about that. That's quite a thing to say, but I believe it's true. I don't have any way to prove it, but I believe that's true.
Does that include people that don't answer the question?
Yeah. I could put statistics on how many baptisms there were, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. And as a matter of fact, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, they worked with 4 other congregations and knocked every single door in Lawton, Oklahoma, which was over 100,000 people in 1 week. Personally. Okay. And then you can't read it there, but another congregation that has done the same thing, there's a man named Russ Blackwell, who's worked with a congregation in Sheffield, Alabama, who they've begun doing these same type of campaigns. Okay. Anybody want to ask any questions or comment or on that little piece? That's kind of the history behind how we've gotten to where we're at now. Okay. Well, let's talk about effort. So why do I bother All these big numbers. Anybody want to make a guess as to why I even bring all this up? What does it matter? Does it even matter? Do what?
Said yes, because there's a whole lot of people in the world.
There's a whole lot of people that we need to reach, right? And that's true, that's very good. But that's not really the reason I pointed out in this class. The reason I bring it up in class is, again, going back to what I said earlier, people's attitudes, our own attitudes, trying to do the work, trying to share the gospel with other people. So the thing about it is, I want to illustrate what should be the important measure of success to any Christian. You know, what is a measure of success in your own mind? To people doing evangelism, trying to share the gospel with other people. What's a measure of success? Somebody want to volunteer? Tell me what you think.
Bringing their souls to the Lord.
Do what?
Bringing their souls to the Lord.
Bringing their souls to the Lord. That's certainly a good number. That's a good measure of success. Anyone else? Yes?
Sowing the seed.
Sowing the seed.
That's what we've been commanded to do.
Absolutely, and that's really what I want to point out. Because let me give you experiences that I've had. Most of the time, when you talk to elderships or people who have never been involved in a campaign like this, they think, well, and they'll look at, maybe they'll talk to somebody who have been involved in the campaign, and they say, well, how did you do? And what's usually the first thing people say to the response to that question? How many baptisms, right? Well, and again, that's not a bad number. Don't get me wrong. Don't misunderstand my intent. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's a good thing when people obey the gospel, right? But is that really the number we want to be concerned with? Is that what we want to hang our hat on for our own sense of worth, our own sense of doing the right thing? No, it's not. It's not. I mean, of course, you want people to obey the gospel. Of course you do. But for our own sense of, what we need to be about, and I'm not talking about a one-time deal. I'm talking about an ongoing effort in your own life to share the gospel with other people, because you're going to get rejection. You're going to get people. I'd say probably 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 5, you'll get results. Okay, some people more, some people less, but that becomes a discouragement to many people over time. Okay, kind of gone over that. And like we just said, why do I go over these? It's important that you understand what God expects of you, right? And that's just what Mickey and Forrest both said. We're just supposed to sow the seed. Now, let me say this another way. Do we have any examples of Jesus trying to make anyone follow him? No, right? No examples at all, do we? Now, did he ever try to force the gospel on anyone? Of course not. But we've actually had people come on campaign from other. They've been trained to do things differently. We had a man show up on campaign one year because he wanted to see how we did it. And I forget now what he had a title for the group that he'd been working with in the church. But he showed up and he went door knocking with us, and it became apparent very quickly that they were going to have to pull him off and have a talk with him, because he would get on the doorstep and begin arguing with people. And I mean, heated arguments, not just, in other words, he was trying to force people to do things, to follow what he thought was right. And so we had to pull him away and have a talk. We can't do that. That's not what we do. We don't want to make people upset with us. And besides all that, that's not what God ever did anyway. He always gives us a choice. He never tries to make us do anything. And so, does God hold you responsible for all the lost in the world? Does he? Does he? In a sense?
In the sense that we're expected to go out and sow the seed.
Right, right. In the sense that we're supposed to share the seed, right? But not personally responsible for somebody we've never known or met in China, right? But some people, people will say that, but then when you look the way they act, they almost act as if they feel like they're responsible for all the lost in the world. That's the way they conduct themselves. That's the way they do it. Well, anyway, the obvious answer is no. So if that's true, then why so many times do we act as if it's yes? And I've heard people talk about how much time and effort they put into it and how terrible they feel when they do not get results. All right. So I think you guys know what I'm trying to get at here. Let's look.
Some that I love and respect dearly will still to this day tell me that the campaign we had here was a waste of time, total waste of time.
I know. I understand. I understand.
My only question is, in that one sister that we have, her soul is not valuable?
Right.
Yes, it is.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. I don't think you can argue with, well, I just put it this way normally, and that's a good point. A lot of people who have never actually been involved in our campaign or in a campaign will say things like that. They have objections. They say, well, you can't share the gospel in one lesson. You can't, those people aren't really ready to obey and so forth. But what I usually say is, well, if that's true, if that's a true statement, then show me an example in Scripture when anyone ever obeyed with more than one lesson. And you can't find that. Every example that I know of in the New Testament, there's only one lesson given. And if the people are going to obey, they obey right then. There's never any long drawn out sequence of there's not even two lessons, just one. So if you want to get right down to it, we're doing exactly the pattern shown in the Scripture. In fact, we do 2 lessons, and that's actually one more than we actually have to do, to be quite honest with you. Think about it that way. But let's look at Matthew 11, 28 and 30. Okay? Oops, wrong button. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Okay? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Learn from me, Jesus is telling us. For I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Well, so what is Jesus telling us about work and effort? Well, of course, he's not talking specifically about personal work here. We understand that, right? This is more of a general living the Christian life, is it not? But if this is true in general, I think the key is learning from Jesus. We're to live the Christian life, but it shouldn't be a yoke. It shouldn't be a huge burden on us. We shouldn't give it to ourselves as a burden. That's the problem. We put it on ourselves a lot of times. Do we not? And would you agree with that? So, go ahead.
I want to go back to the statement you made
Sure.
a while ago. Not everyone that becomes a member of the church, not everyone that is saved, does so after the first lesson.
Absolutely not. You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more.
I think you have to take each individual case, depending upon where they are.
Right.
If they have no background, or if their background in religion is very it's going to take more than one lesson.
Yeah, if their background in religion is very weak,
They have prejudices against the church, and there are many people out there that do have prejudices against the church.
Yep.
It's going to take time, Granted, there are those that, because of where they are, because of their willingness, and I think that's the key to it. Are they open-minded and willing to obey the scriptures? If they are, then certainly after the first lesson, I think it's a good possibility.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point.
Many of them that it's going to take more than one lesson.
And I didn't mean to imply that it should only take one lesson in every case. I didn't mean to imply that at all. So your point's well taken. The point I was trying to make, though, was there's nothing wrong with sharing the gospel with only one lesson and have someone obey the gospel.
No.
There's nothing wrong, but that's what people imply. That's what they try to tell you. That's really the only point I was making. As a matter of fact, statistically speaking, it normally takes about 5 contacts for any given person before they do respond to even agree to sit down and study the Bible. Were you going to say something, Dale?
Well, I was going to say, it's been my observation, I don't have some statistics on it, that
Yep.
most people who agree to a study, you don't know what their motives are for sitting down to that study, but at the end of that study,
Yep.
you know.
That's right.
I mean, because a person who has these biases, I've never had one agree to the second study.
Right.
Only those who really are seeking something more.
That's
will
right.
agree to the second study.
That's right. There's probably 50% that don't even agree to the second study.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And you'll, as a teacher, you learn to figure that out pretty quickly as you teach more and more of these. You find out what they're, some people, they're lonely. They just want to sit down and talk to somebody. And so, yeah, they'll sit down and read the Bible with you. Others have other agendas, But absolutely, that's absolutely true. So yes, I don't mean to imply that we shouldn't try to study more with somebody if they need it. I don't mean to imply that at all. But so we should learn from Jesus and not put more on us than what he does. Okay. So the only point I'm trying to make is God doesn't hold us responsible for all the lost in the world. You're not liable for all the people that might refuse to listen to you when you ask for a Bible study. We're only called to do so much and no more. That's really all I'm trying to get at. Any more comments on any of that? Maybe I'm beating a dead horse here. I know I'm talking to an audience that's probably thought about this quite a bit. Yes?
Well, even the apostles, when they ran into people that rejected the truth, were told just, shake the dust off your feet and go on.
That's right. Jesus instructed them to, didn't he? He said, if they refuse to listen, like you said, shake the dust off your feet. Absolutely. Anything else? All right. Well, let's talk about some motivation then. So we're not to put too much on ourselves, but we are called, aren't we? As a matter of fact, we just had a speaker, Clay Bond, just spoke to us about evangelism, and I think he put it just about as well as anyone I've ever heard. And he said, one quote that really stuck in my mind, and he said this, and he kind of posed it as a question. If we have no desire to share the gospel with others, then perhaps we are not saved ourselves. I want you to think about that. I've never heard anyone say it just like that, but I would have to say he has a real point there, wouldn't you? I mean, look at the class we have. How small, I'm glad you're all here, but compared to the congregation, it's a fairly small class, really. I would have loved to have had to open this partition and move into this other class because we had so many people. I would have loved to have had somebody have to cancel their class because they didn't have any show up. And it's not because I'm teaching this either, but it's because of the material we're gonna learn about. That's the reason I say that. Okay, well, let's look at some scripture. 1 Corinthians 3, 5 through 9. Okay, what then is Apollos and what is Paul? Servants, through whom you believed, even as the Lord gave opportunity to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. So then neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but God who causes the growth. He says this twice. God who causes the growth. Well, I cut off the bottom, didn't I? Okay. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, but each will receive his own reward according to his own labor, for we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. So I think that kind of puts our level of effort in perspective, does it not? You know, it's not dependent on the person doing the work, does it? Because who causes the growth? God. And today, we're using God's Word. If we use God's Word, you know, I'll go back to that slide where I made the statement that if you use this method, you'll be some of the most effective personal evangelists in the brotherhood. And the reason I can say that is because the material we're using comes directly from the Scripture. Yes?
Well, God causes the growth, but it's also in God's plan that His people are the ones who plant and water.
Absolutely.
If we don't plant and water,
That's
there will
right.
be no growth.
God causes, you know, God, if you want to get literal, who causes the corn to grow? Literally, who causes the corn to grow? God does. He put all those laws and chemical processes and living organisms and whatnot in the systems in place. But like Dale said, if you don't plant the seed, none of that can come about, can it? So at whatever level you think, this is all true, right? There has to be an actor to get things going. We have to put things in place, but once that happens, God can cause the growth. Whoops. Well, let's go on to the next one. Luke 14. And this is the parable about the dinner. But he said to him, a man was giving a big dinner, and he invited many. And at the dinner hour, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is ready now. But they all alike began to make excuses. Now, have you guys ever heard of anyone making excuses in the brotherhood? I expect Forrest and Mickey's heard it quite a bit. They all alike began to make excuses. First one said to him, I have bought a piece of land and I need to go out and look at it. Please consider me excused. Now, the purpose of this is not for me to go into this parable and point out all the intricacies, but I will just say fairly obviously that if you bought a piece of land, would you not have already gone and looked at it? Would you not have already done that? So that's a pretty obvious, useless excuse, I would say. Okay? Another one said,
On the internet.
what's that? Yeah, bought it on the internet.
Just leave pictures of it.
Yeah. I'm going to have you teach this class next time.
When we left Thailand, the guy that worked for me bought a house, never saw it. I mean, he did everything on the internet. When he went home, he owned that house.
I see. But he had at least, he bought it over the internet. Okay, I see. Well, I wonder how they would do this. Hammered in stone and send you a picture of it in stone? I don't know. Anyway, another one said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to try them out. Please consider me excused. Another one said, well, I cut it off again. Another one says, I have married a wife and for that reason I cannot come. And the slave came back and reported this to his master. Well, head of the household became angry and said to his slave, go out at once into the streets and lanes of the city and bring bring the poor and the crippled and blind and lame. And the slave said, Master, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room. And the master said to the slave, go out into the highways and along the hedges and compel them to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste of my dinner. So here we have, in a nutshell, again, what God expects of us: to ask, to encourage, to persuade. Because what is he? Compel. Well, you know, they use the word compel, I think. Is that what he says? Go out on the highways along and compel them to come in. But, you know, if you look that up, I expect you're going to find that just means to persuade. It's not like they're hitting them over the head and dragging them into the banquet.
It's almost like begging.
Like begging. That's a very good, I like that. That compel. It's more along the ideas of begging them to come in. That's right. But if they don't come, what? They're not going to get any reward, are they? Right? So, I mean, a lot of lessons could be gleaned from this passage. Now, many people have given various excuses. Anybody want to share maybe some excuses they've heard? Something that comes to mind? For not becoming involved in something like this?
I don't know enough.
I don't know enough. That's common. What else? That's a big one. What's another really big one? Probably in the top 3. Fear. I'm afraid. Anything else? I'll tell you one I've heard several times. One of the most pervasive, well, maybe not one of the most, but for people who have children. I have children, and so cannot be involved. And don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. Children is important, and we of course should raise our family, and of course they take time and so forth. But look, don't let Satan use your children as an excuse. Just think about that for a minute. Don't let him use your children as an excuse. Now, of course, again, there's some common sense judgment has to come into play with that statement. Don't get me wrong. I'm not condemning anyone. Okay, I'm not trying to judge anyone. But there are plenty of people who will watch your children. If you want to go door knocking, for example, or if you want to go on a Bible study, or go to one of these seminars. I've had plenty of people say, "Well, I'd like to come, but I couldn't because this or because that." I've had people. I even had a lady say, "Well, I can't come because I have to do my kid's hair." And I was so shocked I didn't know what to say to her. I really, that caught me so off guard. And she was absolutely 100% serious. She was not just telling me something. She was serious. So don't let Satan, and of course some of these things are relevant. I mean, I understand, but don't let him, don't let him do that to you. There are plenty of people willing to watch your kids, babysit. As a matter of fact, for people who have kids who are 13 years old and older, I encourage them to get their kids involved in this. Take them door knocking with you. They love it. Well, not all of them do. But Michael Rucker went with us a couple of months ago, and boy, he had the biggest time. He really did. Wouldn't you say? Oh, as a matter of fact, he went with us, didn't he, Mickey?
Yes.
He had a good time, didn't he? And he's what, 11?
10.
He's 10. That's right. So, any other excuses you guys can think of? Well, let me ask you this. For most of the excuses, and this parable of people giving excuses, what's the bottom line on these people who gave the excuses that they gave? What's the bottom line?
What?
They didn't want to go.
It wasn't their first priority.
Well, it wasn't their first priority, but they just flat didn't want to do it. And if you look at most, not all, but most excuses today, it's not because they really had an overriding reason. Because let me ask you something. People say, "Well, it's so hot, I just don't want to get out and walk, Well, that same person, though, maybe they like to go fishing, and they'll get out in the middle of August in the hot, hot sun, and they'll sit for hours and sweat and literally suffer. Oh, no, not Mickey.
Okay.
I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm not going to, yeah. I won't mention a certain elder who was driving a bus one year and kept circling the block, and we were wondering what in the world, and then we saw a bass boat sitting out in the yard. So we figured out why we kept going around and around. But I'm not going to mention anything like that. But in terms of excuses, most of the time, it's simply because we don't want to do it. I mean, if we want to do it, we'll go out and put ourselves out, won't we? I mean, if you want to go hunt, if you really like to go quail hunting, you'll get out and tramp, and you'll train dogs, and you'll spend money, or whatever it takes. Or if you like to go deer hunting, or if you like, you get out 30-degree weather, 20-degree weather at 3 in the morning, or whatever it is, you have to get up and go hunting. If you want to do it. If you want to be involved and you want to share the gospel and you want to go knock doors, if you want to learn how to sit down with somebody and say just simple things, how to ask them for a Bible study. If you want to do that, then you'll spend the little bit of time it takes to learn how to do it. Of course, that's my opinion, but that's what I think. Anything else? Bell's about to ring, and we still have a little bit of material to go. And anybody want to comment or have anything to say before we end the class? And again, I hope I'm not beating a dead horse, but these are things that I wish somebody had talked to me about. And I'll tell you a little story. When I was 19 years old, I was living in Abilene, Texas, and I was going to a congregation, Baker Street, I think. Anyway, we were all going out door knocking, and the intent was, I believe, to invite people to a gospel meeting. Well, me being, naive, I just assumed that the only reason we were going out to knock doors is so we could ask people if they wanted to study the Bible. Nobody actually told me that, but that's just what I thought. And so every door I went on, I would invite them to the gospel meeting, and I would ask them, would you like to study the Bible? Well, I had one guy say yes. So I took his name down. Of course, I didn't have any training. I didn't have any, we have contact cards. We have all kinds of things that we can use now that we filled it. So I filled his information out, and boy, I come back, and I was talking to the guy organizing the gospel meeting, and I said, listen, I have a guy who said he wanted to study the Bible. I said, what material do you guys use for Bible study? Oh, well, we don't have any material. And I thought, what? What do you mean? And I said, well, what do you do if somebody, says they want to study? He said, well, that's up to you. You set the study, that's up to you. We don't have, It's like he never even considered such a thing. He didn't know what I was talking about. And so I only had, I remember, it seemed like it was 3 or 4 days. I had said study 3 or 4 days in ahead. And boy, I was looking around, I was trying to find something because I had absolutely no idea. Absolutely no idea. Just got out of high school, just started college. And I ended up, I never went back to that guy's house because I didn't have any material, I didn't know what I was doing. I probably made excuses for myself that I shouldn't have made. And, knowing what I know now, there was a good chance that guy wasn't going to be there anyway. But I will never forget that experience. So, I don't want anyone to think that we're going to put too much on them. We're not. We're going to show you how to do this, but it's going to be easy. I mean, it's really easy. I mean, it's so easy that, it's amazing how easy. God makes things simple. When I teach a class, one of the first things I say is, Bible study is not rocket science. It is not rocket science. Okay, well, thanks for your attention, and we'll continue there next time.